Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? This ain't murder 3. Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Arkansas Radio Studios in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight I'm going to be talking about adventures in camping. Originally I was going to call it adventures in RVing, but some of it, didn't have an RV at the time. My wife and I just got back from a 4,000-mile drive. We stayed at some really nice RV parks and a few not so nice. As we were driving, I got to thinking about some of my past camping trips and thought it might just make a show. Some strange things have happened during some of our adventures. Way back when I was growing up, our dad was a do-it-yourself kind of guy. Save money mostly. He built a camper on the back of his pickup. It was something to see. He was not a carpenter. He didn't work with wood normally, but, that didn't stop him. He built the thing anyway. I think it was way too heavy for the truck, but, like I said, he did it anyway. The camper got the job done. It kept the rain out. Not the cold or the heat, but at least we were dry. He drove that sucker all over the country, and we did a lot of outdoor stuff. We visited some parts of the country that a lot of people never see, and as I get a little bit farther along down the road, someday I hope to go back and visit some of those places, because even though I remember them, I don't remember them all that well. One summer, our dad drove the family to the Great Smoky Mountains. He had been told there was a viewing spot just down the road where we could see the moonbow. It's like a rainbow, only the light comes from the moon, and it's seen through a waterfall. Our mother didn't want to walk, so the 3 of us set out to find the right spot and see this once in or twice sight in a lifetime. As we were walking, a guy in a Jeep stopped and asked if we needed a ride. He was a park official. The old man said yes, and we were going to see the moonbow. So the driver said, "Jump in, I'll take you there." This was back when you did this kind of thing. It wasn't unusual for everyday folks to hitchhike, and it wasn't unusual for everyday folks to pick up hitchhikers. This was before people like Ted Bundy kind of screwed that whole thing up for everybody. The Jeep driver took off going way too fast, and we hung on for our dear lives. There were no seat belts to be used, and there was no law saying that you had to. It took about 20 minutes to get to where we were going. Once we got there, we stood around waiting to see this spectacle of nature. As we stood there, a small crowd had joined us. The moon kind of came up, but it was obscured by a thick cloud layer. It was only a sliver of a moon, so it didn't even give off any light. It was way too dark to see anything, and so, after standing there for I don't know how long, everybody decided it was a non-event and left. The old man said we should get going because we had a long walk ahead of us. We started hiking along the road back the way we had come. We walked along the road in the slight illumination of the roadside lights. They were just enough to make our way. No cars came by, or trucks, or convenient Jeep drivers. We had walked for quite a ways when my brother looked back and he noticed the lights way back behind us were going out. He said something about they were turning off the road lights. Well, we all looked back and we watched as, one by one, the lights went out behind us. The darkness was coming our way. It kind of looked like something out of a horror movie. We started walking faster, which then led to running, which then led to an all-out sprint, trying to stay in the little circles of light. That year, several people had been attacked by bears, and we were right in the middle of bear country. We're not talking Yogi and Boo Boo. We're talking these large, ferocious creatures that like to eat people. They look real cute and friendly in the movies and on TV, but up close and personal, well, they're not all that friendly. The light right behind us went out. And then the light that we were standing under went out. We ran towards the next light only to watch it go out seconds before we got there. The lights were leaving us behind. Have you ever been in the mountains surrounded by huge trees at night? It gets dark. Very dark. The imagination started to kick in, and I could have sworn I heard bears running around us, tearing down small trees. The imagination can get the best of you in situations like this. We could see an intersection up ahead, but the light was just ready to blink out as we approached. Now, in total darkness, we slowed down, unable to even see the road that we were following. A car zipped by the intersection. We saw the light go by, and then it stopped. The car backed up, and then it stopped right there in the intersection. We ran up and found out it was the folks that were staying in a tent right next to our campsite. They'd been traveling with us, and they knew who we were, and we knew who they were. Talk about a weird coincidence. We jumped in, glad to be saved from the bears. The folks in the tent had decided to drive into town to get some supplies, and they were en route back to their tent. The passenger had been sitting there watching the trees go by and had spotted our old man's white shirt in the dark. Had we had to continue walking, it would have been several hours before we got home, if we ever got there at all. We may have just become another statistic, or maybe we would have been in David Paulides' book, Missing 411. Old man and 2 kids disappeared. Well, we didn't, so we're not in his book. From the camper the old man had built, my brother and I progressed, if you could call it that, to a tent. The tent had belonged to the Boy Scout troop that raised enough money to buy a new one with fewer holes and all the parts. So our dad bought the old one. It was missing the tent poles to begin with, and it had more holes in it than was necessary, but that didn't stop us. We found some pieces of wood and managed to build our own parts, and we began using the tent. We set up the tent in the backyard on occasion, and we would sleep out in the yard, acting as if we were out in the middle of a forest somewhere, with a convenient bathroom right next door. Late one night, we were laying there, reading by the light of a couple of flashlights. We lived in a really small house, and it really didn't feel right having 4 people stuffed into that little place, so any time we could get outside was a relief. The tent flap didn't reach all the way to the ground, and the ground sheet had a little flap that stood up, but it had been torn, so it no longer did its job. We're laying there reading comic books when something caught our attention. Someone was standing right by the tent flap. We could see their feet below the flap. The person was wearing Converse basketball shoes, the kind with the rubber toe cap. We both froze and lay there, waiting to either be killed or discover it was our neighbor come to say hello. The person stood there for about a minute, long enough for both of us to run every conceivable scenario of bad things through our minds. Then the person turned and left. Our yard was surrounded by a fence, and in order to get in, you had to either open the old creaky gate that made a lot of noise, or you had to climb the fence, which also would have made some sound. We both lay there listening for any sound, but we never heard anything. It was the kind of quiet in a movie just before the monster appears and kills everyone. After our hearts had settled down enough to think, we snuck over and peered from the tent flap. Now, there was nobody in the yard, so we looked at the ground in front of the flap. There were footprints. If you're not familiar with Converse shoes, they have a diamond pattern on their soles. By the light of our flashlights, we could just make out some footprints. We checked the yard to be sure no knife-wielding maniac was around, and then we went back to our tent. We didn't get any sleep that night. The next day, we asked everybody we knew whether they had paid us a midnight visit, and they all claimed innocence. That next night, we ran strings all around the backyard tied to cans, just like in the movies. Whoever had been there never did come back. It helped not one bit that the night of the incident, we'd been watching Night Gallery, and it was that episode about the doll that killed people, so we were both already a little high-strung before this midnight visitor. Of course, this didn't stop us from camping out. When we were old enough, we both bought pickups with camper shells so we could enjoy the great outdoors some more. We got to see the northern lights one night up in northern Wisconsin. If you've never seen them, watching them on TV just is not the same. When you actually look up at the sky and see those colored lights flashing up in the atmosphere, it's quite a sight. It's kind of like seeing the Grand Canyon up close and personal as opposed to watching it on TV. It's just not the same. On another camping trip, we were in some roadside park, well away from any inhabitants. The place was just a parking spot under the trees with picnic tables and fire rings. As we sat there watching the fire burn, we heard the sounds of motorcycles coming along the road. Lots of them. As we watched, a gang of maybe 15 or 20 bikers went flying by our campsite. They were way past the posted speed limit, but there was nobody around to try writing them a ticket. They were literally flying down the highway. As the sound of their engines began to grow weak, a second gang flew by. This one looked to be about 30 or 40 members. In the dark, all we could see was their headlights and some of the guys riding. The next morning, we stopped to get gas at a local station and heard there had been a big fight involving two rival biker gangs. One had invaded the other's territory and proceeded to get their backsides handed to them. As far as anyone knew, nobody died, but there were several in the hospital, and the rest were in jail. The fight had taken place just up the road from where we were sleeping. maybe a mile or two. We found out later this area was the main source of drugs coming into the United States from Canada, and it was a disputed territory among the outlaw gangs. Now, I know most motorcyclists are decent folks who just like to ride on two wheels. Then you got the 1%ers. I'm pretty sure that's who these guys were because, well, the rest of the motorcyclists don't go around beating each other up. In the Army, we would go for hikes in the woods and then we would camp out. Not really. It was called a forced march and a bivouac. We almost always had the tent that leaked, and it rains a lot in Kentucky. Cold and wet is most of my impression of Fort Knox. At our home unit, we seldom ever used tents. We just slept on the fenders of the tanks. If it rained, we had to sleep inside the turret. There's no room in the turret. I have slept sitting up in the gunner's seat many a night. My dad was getting on in age, and his house, or rather the house he was renting, had got beat up in a storm. The roof was mostly gone. I tried to get him into a new place, but he wanted to stay in the same one. He said he liked the neighborhood, which is weird since he did get into a fight with the local gang on more than one occasion. They would tear up his yard with their motorcycles. We're not talking outlaw bikers. We're talking a bunch of teenagers on two-wheeled conveyances. He'd threatened them a few times, and they promptly ignored him. Seeing as he was about 75 years old at the time, I guess they didn't feel too intimidated. Well, when his threats didn't do anything, one day he stood in the yard behind a tree, holding a 2x4, and he waited. As these crazy guys came flying along on their bikes, tearing up and destroying his yard, well, he nailed the first guy right in the chest with the 2x4. The guy wound up in the hospital with several broken ribs. The old man wound up in jail for his troubles, but the nasty boys never did set foot or wheel on his yard again after that. It seemed everybody in the neighborhood kind of respected him after he took that guy off his bike. People wonder where I get my anger and violence from. Well, I think I inherited it. Well, we decided, me and my wife, that we were going to buy the old man a FEMA trailer and we're going to park it right next to the house so he could get in a dry place while work was done, which would never happen. The owners were glad to take his money, but they never fixed anything. I had to do the whole deal over the phone because at the time I still had a job and I was expected to show up for work every day. I bought a FEMA trailer from an RV dealership near him, and we arranged to get it moved to his place as soon as I could get over there. The RV salesman sent us out to the yard to see what I had paid for. Well, the trailer looked okay, but then the yard man said all the FEMA trailers leaked. He opened the door and you could smell the damp inside. I went back in, I talked to the salesman, and he didn't seem too interested in giving us our money back, even though he had sold us a crappy trailer. As we were arguing in the sales room, a couple just traded their C-Class in on a brand new fifth wheel. The C-Class was in okay shape, so I asked if I could take it instead of going to court to try to get our money back. Well, the dealer wasn't too interested in going to court, so he decided he would strike a deal, and we wound up with a Jayco C-Class RV that we were going to park in the old man's yard so he could live in it. Well, instead of living in the trailer, in the C-Class, He wound up going into the hospital. He had a huge cancerous growth on his forehead that he always hid under his hat. One day his hat fell off, and it's like, what the heck is that? Well, he wound up in John Seeley for quite a while. When he got out of the hospital, we were told that he was not in good enough shape to live on his own, so we decided we'd take him back home with us. I drove him and myself back to our place in Laredo in the C-Class, and my wife followed behind in her CRV. We fixed up the middle bedroom in our house, and then he wound up having to go into a nursing home due to other kinds of problems. Now, me and my wife had a giant motorhome parked in our yard, so we took it camping. No long trips because it only got 7 miles to a gallon, but it was fun. Once we would get to an RV site, we couldn't really go anywhere since the RV was too big to drive around town in. This thing is 30 feet long. I think it was 15 feet high and 8 feet wide. Still, it was neat to drive down the highway. If you needed the bathroom, all you had to do was pull over to the side, stop, and, well, there was the bathroom right behind you. We could make coffee while going down the road. To keep things in working condition, I would drive to the grocery store once a month so the engine and the tires could get exercised. After one trip, I was standing in front of the engine when I heard a weird sound and something hit the ground right under the front bumper. I looked down and there was a possum. It had been under the hood the whole time I was driving, like about a good 30 minutes. I looked at it, and it looked back at me. You've heard the expression, playing possum? Well, they invented it. This thing was trying to act like it was dead when, well, I could see it breathing. It was literally laying on its back with all 4 feet straight in the air. When it realized that I wasn't falling for its little trick, it leaped to its feet, which is quite a stunt for a possum, and it took off running across the yard, well, if you could call that running. A thing a lot of people don't know about having a possum living in your yard, they eat ticks. If you have possums in your yard, you probably won't have any ticks. They hardly ever contract rabies. They don't bite unless they really corner them. But they are kind of weird looking. And the spelling is really weird since possum starts with an O. One year, my wife and I decided we were going to go to an RV show in San Antonio. We had every intention of looking, but we both agreed that we wouldn't buy anything. Well, due to work, I wound up missing the RV show in San Antonio, so we had to go to Austin instead, which is just a little farther. Instead of a 150-mile drive, we had a 250-mile drive, but hey, there's not a lot to do in Laredo, so we went to Austin. We were not going to buy anything. After the show, we had both fallen in love with a Forest River R-Pod trailer. They're really cool looking, and they have all the latest things like the black tank flush hookup. It's a bunch of jets inside the black tank that you hook a hose up and it literally blasts all the ick out of the black tank. Had an XM radio in the sleeping compartment, and it had a TV mounted on the wall. And it all came standard. Never buy an RV at a show. They tell you how much you'll save, but actually it costs the same to go to a dealership later, and you have a few days to decide whether you really want to spend the money. The salesmen are all willing to tell you anything to make a sale. They'll tell you the rig you're looking at gets 18 miles to a gallon of gas. Yeah, right. Going downhill with a tailwind and nothing in the back. Well, a couple of days after the show, we drove over to Corpus Christi and we went to the only dealership that had Forest River campers. We looked at the R-Pod and I noticed the front window leaked. We looked at other R-Pods and they all had the same problem. Considering they cost $25,000 each, you'd think they wouldn't leak. The water was dripping in from the front window right on top of the mattress. Just what I like. A nice wet bed to sleep in. Kind of reminds me of the Army. Well, the salesman asked if we would consider a KZ instead. At first I wasn't impressed by the outside, but the inside was great. And it didn't leak. We paid $15,000 for a trailer with more room, and it didn't have a wet bath like the R-Pod. I don't like wet baths. You sit on the toilet while taking a shower. The toilet paper is going to get wet. I guess that's why it's called a wet bath. Oh, our trailer, the one we did buy, has a separate shower from the toilet area, and it doesn't leak. It didn't have a TV in it either, but we've discovered that when we're out camping, we don't watch TV anyway. We're there to be out in nature. We go for walks, we read books, we play with Mark. We enjoy being away from TVs for a while. We've taken the trailer all over the country, and we've had some rather weird experiences with it. At Bastrop, Texas State Park, we were walking around, and we spotted an exact same model that we had bought. We got to talking to the couple that were sitting in front of it, and they invited us to have a seat and visit. So we shared some camping stories. The guy mentioned that originally they were going to buy an R-Pod, but they changed their minds because the front window leaked on the unit they were looking at. He then said that the salesman showed them the KZ and they bought it. The dealership was in Corpus. Remember, there's only one dealership in Corpus that had Forest River and KZ trailers. I asked if they had gone to Colonia del Rey RV place, and he said yes. Then he said the salesman was named Flash Gordon. We had bought our RV from Flash Gordon as well. I don't like coincidences. They worry me. The couple at Bastrop's story was way too much like our own, and that's just plain weird. And with that, I am going to take a brief pause, play a couple of commercials. Don't go away. I'll be right back after this. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Did you hear a bump in the night and you think it just might be a ghost? Contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. That's the LPRS for all your otherworldly needs. Coffee makes the world go round. And around here, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike, 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. If you're not looking for coffee, try their tea. It's the best in town. And remember, life is too short to drink bad coffee. Did you go out UFO hunting and couldn't focus on the sky? Swing on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle Del Norte, right across from the Embassy Suites. That's not a weather balloon, that's a flying saucer. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. This is Arkanasa Radio you've been listening to. And welcome back to the show. On one trip, we stayed at the Cooper Lake State Park in Texas. There are two sites to stay in. One on the south side and one on the north. We took the north side because it looked nicer on the map. We pulled in, set up, and then we took our late afternoon walk. We like to see what kinds of RVs are around us and the people that are in them. We walked all around the park and discovered we were the only people there. We had the whole place to ourselves, just like in any good horror movie. Once the sun was down and the place was as dark as a cemetery, we turned in for the night. It felt uncomfortable, creepy, like there was some unseen, unheard thing sneaking around the trailer. While RVing, I seldom lock the door at night. I've left things outside and I've never lost any of them. That night, I locked the door and I put my pistol right next to me on the nightstand. I was feeling just a little bit paranoid. Later on, while reading Jerry Hestand's book, Hunting Apes in America, My Life as a Bigfoot Hunter, I discovered the area around the north side of the lake is a well-known Bigfoot location. Now, Bigfoot has seldom been mentioned in connection with violence and death, but there have been some reports. Also, Bigfoot might not be the only cryptid running around the area. Well, once again, that was one of those nights where I just didn't get any sleep. Felt really strange. During a visit to Natchez Trace in Tennessee, I discovered a slight flaw in our RV design. The KZ has downspouts at each corner. This gets the rain out and away from the sides of the trailer so you don't get streaks from debris on the roof. It's a great idea. Until it starts to rain when you're trying to break camp. We'd spent the night at the Trace, and in the morning it looked just a bit like it was going to rain. We had breakfast and I was about to start tearing down. Unhook the sewer line, disconnect the water, roll up the awning, all in a slight drizzle. As I was working, the rain went from just rain to an all-out downpour. The four stabilizers, they're the things that keeps the trailer from rocking around too much at night, are at the four corners, right under the downspouts. And you have to get down there to see what you're doing. I had to stick my head under each downspout and get drenched by cold, rainy water as I unscrewed the stabilizer jacks. It only took me about 4 minutes, but I couldn't have gotten any wetter and colder. It had dropped from 70 degrees to 50 in about 10 minutes. Once everything was hooked up and stowed and secured, I jumped back inside the trailer so I could change into something drier and warmer. It rained all the way to Memphis. The roads in Tennessee are well maintained, except around Memphis. Memphis has some of the worst roads in the country. I've driven on old ranch roads that were smoother and better maintained than the roads in and around that town. I wonder what they spend all their money on. Keeping up Elvis's mansion? Right across the Mississippi from Memphis is West Memphis, Memphis, Arkansas. There's a nice old RV park there called the Tom Sawyer, All the buildings have a stripe painted on them up around the top. This is where the water rises during a flood. It's about 10 feet above the ground. It's still a nice place to visit, but just don't go there during the rainy season. You might wind up being washed out into the Mississippi. We wound up with a dog. I named him Mark Twain. When our neighbor found him on her front yard, she thought he was just somebody's dog who'd gotten lost. She gave him a little bowl of food and water, and he stayed in her front yard for days. When nobody showed up to claim him, she brought him over to us. He looked like he'd been living on the streets for weeks, and so I gave him some food and a good scrubbing. Had to use the scissors to cut away all the knots to try and figure out what kind of dog he was. Well, it soon became obvious that Mark wanted to be everywhere we were, so on our next camping trip, we took him along. Other than barking at strangers, he behaves very well. We drove north to Elkhart, Indiana to see the RV museum. If you haven't been there yet, you should go. It is something to see. Wow. If you're wondering why there is an RV museum in Elkhart, Indiana, it's because something around 85% of all U.S.-made RVs come out of Elkhart. The place is literally infested with RV dealerships and RV parks and RV repair shops and RV supply stores. If you need it in an RV, you will find it in Elkhart. We thought we'd spend just a couple hours and then hit the road for Point Pleasant, West Virginia, to see the Mothman Museum. Well, we wound up staying way too long, and we didn't get going until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's an 8-hour drive from Point Pleasant to Elkhart. As the sun was going down, we decided that we would stop at the next RV park we came to. My wife got her tablet out and did a little searching. It said there was an RV park just ahead in a little town called Chillicothe, Ohio. She punched in the address on the GPS and we followed the directions. The device said, "Turn onto this road." So we turned. And we continued for what was supposed to be just a few miles. And suddenly the GPS shut down. Just went off for no reason. I continued for a few miles, hoping to see the RV park signs. Well, the GPS popped back on, and then it said that we had passed the park. It said, "Make a U-turn and go back." We're on a tiny little back road with trees on both sides. If a car had come along in the opposite direction, we would have had to slow way down in order to pass. There was no room anywhere. I was looking for some place where I could turn around, and I was pulling a 20-foot trailer. The only thing I could see was there was a small bridge to the right. I would have to back onto it, and it was at an odd angle. It was more than a 45-degree turn. The trailer has a polished aluminum rock shield on the front. When I put the truck in reverse, well, the backup lights reflect on the rock shield, so I couldn't see back very well. My wife was going to get out and direct me when Mark began to bark. He went from barking to growling to snapping. He lunged at the side window as if there was some monster lurking just outside. I told her to hang on to him, and I got out to have a look. Yes, I was armed. I looked around the trailer, but I saw nothing. I continued to back up a few feet, and then I'd get back out of the vehicle and go back and look, make sure I wasn't driving off into a hole. Mark was going from crazy to ballistic. I really thought he might have lost it. He was doing the old Cujo bit. After a very slow and very noisy maneuver, I was able to get turned around and headed back the way we'd come. As soon as we were away from the bridge, Mark settled down, and he took up refuge under my wife's legs. The GPS said, "Drive this way and turn left." I did as told, and we proceeded to drive completely around a small mountain. We turned onto several small back roads and drove until we wound up back at the bridge. Now the GPS was saying we were to turn onto that same bridge, and the RV park was right there. Well, I followed the GPS. We turned, we went across the bridge, and as I was driving, Mark began growling and snapping at the window again. I spent as much time looking out the side window trying to see what he was looking at as I did looking forward and trying to drive. There was nothing there that I could see. Once we cleared the bridge, Mark calmed down again. I drove along a gravel road looking for anything that looked like an RV park. Instead, we came to a farm. The road went no further. I had to pull off the side of the road into a field. Fortunately, there was nothing growing there at the time. And I had to turn around, carefully not to drive off into a rut or a plowed groove or run over any farm implements in the dark. Managed to get turned around and, well, I had to drive back across that same bridge, and once again Mark went ballistic. We decided we were not going to stay in Chillicothe if I could get away with it, so we drove out to the highway and I stopped at the first gas station I came to. After gassing up, I went inside and I just asked the guy at the counter if there were any RV parks in the area. Well, he looked at me as if he didn't know what an RV was. I really want to know who it is that calls every single time I'm on the mic. I think somebody, like maybe one of my neighbors, is watching me with binoculars. No, that's just paranoid. I am on the do not call list. And yet, every day I will get 10 or 20 phone calls from people wanting me to buy a timeshare, sell a timeshare that I don't have, take a vacation that I don't want to take, etc., etc. Oh yes, and the health insurance companies. Even though my wife and I have really good health insurance, they just keep offering. I tell them we're on the do not call list, and they hang up. And then they'll call back. Getting back to the story, I was at the gas station and asked the guy if there was an RV park in the area, and he acted as if he didn't know what an RV was. So I pointed to my truck with the trailer, and I said, "Is there an RV park around here?" He looked at my truck, he looked at the trailer, he looked back at me, and he said, "They don't have any RV parks in Chillicothe." He said it as if he wasn't too sure what an RV was still. Well, I got back in the truck and we took off. I told my wife, let's just go ahead and go to Point Pleasant and we'll stop there for the night. It's a long drive when you're tired and frustrated, but oh well. We arrived after midnight and we found the park. It was a city park, and it only had a few spots that were open. A lot of the folks travel from place to work. Instead of renting a hotel or an apartment, they take an RV along and they stay at any park that's available. It's a lot cheaper than hotels. Once we found our spot, I got busy hooking up the electric and the water. There was a guy sitting at the next RV over at a campfire, drinking beer and enjoying the evening. We got to talking while I was hooking up. Of all the weird things, he said he was from Chillicothe, Ohio. I told him what I'd just been through, and he said there were no RV parks in that town. It was just a little too weird. The thing a lot of folks miss about traveling is they go from hotel to hotel, never actually seeing the country. They drive from point A to point B, they check into a hotel, they have dinner in the restaurant, they sleep, they get up, they drive from point B to point C, and they only see what's along the side of the road. If we see something interesting, like a big sign that says there's a weird attraction ahead, we're going to stop and check it out. We've seen a lot of the country the folks in the airplanes don't even know exist, and there's no TSA to deal with. Haven't been fondled by a TSA agent in a long time, and I'm not about to start now. If you arrive at a park after hours, there's a sign in place and you just drop your payment in the slot. Try that at a hotel. Once we find an RV park for the night, we'll walk around looking at everyone's rig. The people will ask where we're from and where we're going. We meet people from all over the country, sometimes from different parts of the world. No matter what kind of RV they have, everyone acts as if we're all pretty much the same. The Class A folks talk to the TT haulers like we're family. A TT is a towed trailer, for those of you that don't know RVing lingo. The Class A is that great big thing that looks like a bus. Those things tend to be expensive. A Class B looks like it's a camper stuck on top of a truck frame. A B class looks exactly like the C class, except it doesn't have that little thing sticks out over the cab. A fiver is a fifth wheel, which is a trailer mounted in the bed of the truck instead of the bumper hitch. In some states, it's legal to ride in the back of a fifth wheel while it's on the road because it's not considered a trailer. Then there's the TT. That's the one we have. I didn't pick the name. I just bought the rig. We've stayed in a lot of RV parks. The nicest one was a city park in Illinois that cost $15 for the night. And that was a full hookup. It was right on a river, had huge trees, and there was a walking trail that went through the trees. The shower facilities were clean and well managed. Each site was isolated. There were other campers there, but you couldn't hear them and you could barely see them. The worst RV park cost $45 a night, and it was all paved. There were hardly any trees, more like just big bushes. The shower facility was nothing to get excited about. The hookups were all deep underground, so you had to reach way down in order to screw in your water or hook up the sewer. And the place was not dog-friendly. When the guy at the front desk saw that we had a dog, he handed my wife a 3-page sheet with all of the dog rules. Don't let your dog bark. Don't let your dog run around. Don't let your dog poop where he shouldn't. If he does poop, you got to clean it up. Well, Mark proceeded to show his displeasure by going to the bathroom right in front of the office's front door. It took me a while to get that mess cleaned up. He was very expressive. The manager sat there staring at me like, well, anyway. As we drive around this fabulous country of ours, we like to stop and see as many attractions as we can. The folks that travel by air are missing everything except a groping by TSA. Our luggage has never been sent to Alaska or Europe. We don't have to pay extra on baggage. We don't get squeezed in between two sweaty guys with an aversion for soap. And it's not like leaving home. As we drive along, our home is always with us. You've heard the expression, there's no place like home? When you get to a campsite, you're home. You go into a room that you own. You have dinner on a table that is yours. It's like being at home. Here is a good place to mention my TSA experience. I was flying out to El Centro, California for work. I was traveling armed because it's a bad idea to put your sidearm in checked luggage, and this was a few months after 9/11. In Laredo, I showed my credentials at the front desk and I went around the security table. No problem. I flew into Dallas, and then I wound up spending 4 hours waiting on the runway for a chance to take off. It's a 4-hour flight. There was a thunderstorm in Dallas, so instead of letting us wait in the terminal, they piled us into a plane, and they only ran the air conditioning when people began to pass out from the heat. 8 hours on a plane is fun, if you don't like yourself. Once we landed in LAX, which is an appropriate name, LAX, we had to leave the terminal, walk outside along a sidewalk, and then go back in to a different terminal. There was no connection between one place and another. I had to go next door in order to take a small plane to El Centro. I stepped up to the security checkpoint and I showed her my credentials. The girl told me go through a door to the right and walk around the X-ray machines. I walked to the end of the corridor, and there sat a round individual in a blue jacket with TSA patches on it. He told me I couldn't be there, and I had to go through security. I showed him my badge and credentials. His eyes didn't seem to focus on anything. He just said, "Go back through the X-ray machine." I said, "Well, okay, but I'll set off the alarms." He looked at me and asked, "Why would I set off the alarms?" I told him I was carrying my sidearm. He got all antsy, and he wanted to know why I had a gun. I showed him my credentials once more. In fact, I looked at them to make sure it was my credentials, and then I showed them to him. I told him who I was and why I was there. His eyes kind of went in and out of focus. And then he said I had to go through the X-ray machine anyway. I got tired of arguing with this guy, and I turned around and went back to the security desk. The girl there told me to go through the door once more. I told her about the TSA mental midget that was in the way. She asked me to wait, and then she went to talk to Mr. TSA. After several minutes, she came back with an embarrassed look on her face. She told me I could walk around the X-ray machine, but my carry-on bag had to go through. It was all I could do not to laugh. I slapped my backpack down on the belt and I ran around to the other side so I could see the look on the X-ray tech when he saw what was in my bag. I was carrying a few extra boxes of bullets, my radio, my knife, my ASP baton, all the gear that I needed to do my job that I didn't want to lose to some baggage handler that stole things. My bag went into the X-ray machine, and the guy's eyes grew 3 times as big. He reached back behind his head to hit the panic button. Well, the girl in charge stopped him and told him what was going on, and he gave the TSA guy a dirty look as I grabbed my bag and left. RVing. There is no TSA fondlers to deal with. I vote with my paycheck now. It's just me with one vote. If more people would say they're not flying until the TSA fondlers go away, maybe someday they will no longer be touching you in all the wrong places. Nope, I haven't flown again ever since that day, and I never will. RVing is so much more relaxing and comfortable than flying. We drove up to Kentucky to visit the Ark Encounter, which is a Christian, religious, and creationist theme park that opened in Grant County, Kentucky in 2016. The centerpiece of the park is a large representation of Noah's Ark based on the Genesis flood story from the Bible. The Ark is 510 feet long. It's 85 feet wide and 51 feet high. If you watch Ozzy Osbourne's show, he visited the Ark one time. Somehow managed to get up on the wrong floor, but oh well. Ark Encounter is operated by the Answers in Genesis, a young Earth creationist organization that is also operating the Creation Museum, which is 45 minutes away in Petersburg, Kentucky. You can buy a ticket to both places, but we didn't have the time to visit both, so we just went to the Ark. The theme park promotes young Earth creationist beliefs about the age of the universe, age of the Earth, and the coexistence of man and dinosaurs. As you're walking around the displays, you will see what looked like dinosaurs in some of the cages that Noah had taken on board. The idea being that the dinosaurs evolved into other creatures, like birds, and eventually we no longer had any of these large creatures running around. It is well worth seeing. We drove through Nashville, Tennessee during a rainstorm to see it. As we're driving, I kept thinking how appropriate we're driving through a flood to get to the Noah's Ark. The great thing about driving is you get to see the country. The bad thing is you get to see some of the country you wish you could avoid. And Nashville is one of these places. Not because the city is bad or anything. It's their jacked up road system. In most towns, you stay in the middle lane, you'll enter the town, and you'll exit the town without having to switch lanes. And not Nashville. The main interstate, 40, goes right through the city. It changes lanes like a Mad Max wannabe. And they saved a bunch of money on signs. The sign telling you need to move to the left or the right lane is usually about a quarter mile from the split. If you signal you're about to move over, the kind-hearted folks in Nashville will speed up to get in your way. No, not all of them, but enough to make you want to scream. Just ask my wife. She said driving with me is like starring in an episode of MST3K. All the voices and none of the entertainment. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Don't trust GPS. It will get you into some strange situations. We crossed from Kentucky into Virginia by way of a tunnel at the Cumberland Gap. As we exited the tunnel, the GPS said turn left. Well, the road looked good, so we headed that way. As we drove, the road went from a 4-lane to a 2-lane. There was a sign. Said, truckers, use alternative route. Well, I didn't see any alternative route. As far as we could see, it was just the 2-lane road going ahead. The road began to wind a bit, and then a lot. Then we began to climb a mountain. Now, normally this is no big deal. I've pulled our trailer over mountains in East Tennessee many times. However, as we were going, there was a sign that said, curve, 20 miles an hour. And it was. It was a very sharp hairpin turn that I had to take at 15. Had there been a car coming from the other direction, they would have hit the trailer because in order to make that corner, I had to use the middle of the road. As I came out of the curve, the road went up a steep grade. So now I'm starting at the bottom at 15, which, well, that's not a good way to do it. I crested the hill doing 5 miles an hour. My wife searched in vain for an alternative road that would have taken us back to an interstate or a highway, and that's when we lost not GPS, but her internet signal. Her tablet said no internet. We were on what was kind of like a very slow-moving roller coaster. It went up, it went down, it went left, it went right. It did everything but go in a straight line. After way too many miles, we finally came to a connecting road that took us out to the highway. Curse you, GPS. When we finally got back to civilization, we were in Tennessee. Going from Kentucky to Virginia, and we wind up in Tennessee. The sun was going down, and we decided to grab the next RV park that we came to. We found a place called Around the Pond RV Park, which is off 85. If you ever get there, I highly recommend you stop. It's a nice place. Well, it was dark as we pulled in. I stopped at the office, which was closed, and I looked for the paperwork that I needed to fill out. Like I said, RV parks let you register at night without a desk clerk. As I'm looking around for the paperwork, a voice comes out of the dark. It said, "Can I help you?" I listened for the sound of banjos, but I didn't hear any. I told the voice that we were looking for a spot for the night. The voice said I could use the one right in front of the office. Well, I asked about the paperwork that I needed to fill out, and he said, "It's $30, cash only." I handed over the cash to a tall, bearded man, and then I pulled over and I parked and hooked up. As I was getting into the camper, it dawned on me I had just handed $30 to some total stranger in the dark, and I wasn't too sure he even worked there. All that night I expected to hear a knock at the door and find somebody wanting to know why we hadn't registered. Fortunately, the next morning I saw the guy. He was sitting at the front office, so I know I hadn't been scammed. And this was a very nice RV park. Turned out he not only ran the place, he owned it. In Floyd, Virginia, we always stay at the Chantilly Farms RV Park. It's a nice place and there's a lot of spaces, usually. Well, we got there right at the beginning of Floyd Fest, and the place was full. The manager said we could use one of the spots in front of the owner's office. The offices all have 30-amp plugs along the sides, and there were sewer and water hookups. You just had to run a really long cord from the building out to the parking lot. The gravel parking lot was a bit sloped. I backed in, and then I had to try leveling the trailer. I used every block I had to get the front end up high enough so that all the systems would work. You have to level your trailer or things don't operate. That and you tend to slide across the floor. It looked as if a strong wind would send us careening down the hill into the middle of the night. The situation looked a little shaky. That evening, I visited the cemetery. We've stayed in an RV park with an alligator pit, and we've stayed in one with a cemetery. We've had some other unusual things in various RV places, but those are the two that come to mind. Well, I paid my respects, like I always do. Stop by the cemetery and take off my hat. I just tell the folks there that I hope they're happy and comfortable. You might find this a bit odd, but I find it necessary. Then, for no reason that I can possibly come up with, I said that if they wanted to, the folks buried there could stop by our trailer if they wanted. Why that popped out of my head, I don't know. Late that night, it sounded as if somebody was walking around in our trailer. I know it wasn't Mark. He was curled up at the foot of the bed unconscious. My wife was asleep too. Who else could it have been? The tongue of the trailer was way up high in the air so that there were no way I could put the stabilizers down. So the trailer did rock back and forth anytime anybody walked, and that's what I was feeling. The next morning, my wife said she heard footsteps in the night, and she thinks it might have been a ghost. I agree with her. Well, that day I asked the manager if it would be okay if I parked sideways to the office, and he said yes. We turned the trailer to the side, and now we were able to put the stabilizers down, and it was much more comfortable. While in distant towns, you should get out and see the sights. My nephew took us to see Dinosaur Kingdom 2. Let's see how to describe this. During the Civil War, the Union troops were supposed to have found dinosaurs roaming around in a valley. They tried to use them as a weapon, but the outcome was not what anybody expected. Here's what their page says. From the creators of Foamhinge and Lexington's Ghost Tour. Created by nationally known attraction builder and theme park designer Mark Klein, whose work has been featured on the Discovery Channel, the Travel Channel, and the Smithsonian Channel, as well as Fox, TBS, and BBC networks. His creations are also used by TV, movie, and rock stars. Enter into a time tunnel and discover Stonewall Jackson battling a vicious Spinosaurus. Get surrounded by deadly meat eaters. See Abraham Lincoln after he's See Abraham Lincoln after he has lost the Gettysburg Address to a pterodon. When did pterodactyls get called pterodons? They didn't ask me if they could change the name, but oh well. Witness a stegosaurus being milked. If you like prehistoric creatures and Civil War history, you'll flip out over Dinosaur Kingdom 2. It was quite an attraction. You really have got to see it. If you like to travel and you want to try RVing, there are a lot of places that will rent you an RV. It's not quite the same since it's not yours, so therefore it's not really home, but it is close. It all depends on how much money you want to spend, and you may discover you really enjoy it. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, they say murder 3? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?